Hey everyone, how's it going? Matthew Kadish here, author of the Earthman Jack Space Saga, available over on Amazon.com. And in today's video, we are talking more Star Wars news, but this time we're looking at David Benioff and Dan Weiss, who you might know as the producers of the Game of Thrones series, and what their involvement is going to be in the next trilogy of Star Wars films that we can expect to see in theaters. So if you'd like to know the latest update as to their involvement and what exactly they're going to be doing with these movies, check out today's video. I hope you enjoy it. So basically, we want to ask, are Benioff and Weiss still making their Star Wars movies? And this is another article from Nerdist where it says that they might not be writing all their Star Wars movies. And this is an article from Michael Walsh, and it goes, it's not exactly a hot take to say that the final 2 seasons of Game of Thrones has made many viewers and critics question the writing abilities of showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. There's nothing that can be done about how things ended in the Seven Kingdoms, but fans of the galaxy far, far away are very concerned over what the pair will do with the upcoming Star Wars trilogy. Maybe they shouldn't be, but not because the duo have learned from their mistakes. They might not be writing all of their own movies. As Slash Film points out, there's an interesting tidbit in a piece at The Hollywood Reporter, which we'll be getting to in a second, questioning the wisdom of the mega deal Netflix just gave to Benioff and Weiss. It raises the issue about exactly how much writing they will do for Disney in creating their trilogies set in the Old Republic, and it's a lot less than first expected. The quote says, sources say the Thrones pair is writing a treatment for a Star Wars trilogy and is committed to pinning at least one of the films. The original deal was to write all 3. It's unclear if the duo, who also have another feature for Fox Disney carved out, will do more than just write for Star Wars. When their Lucasfilm deal was first announced, it seemed possible they would write and maybe even direct the entire trilogy themselves, but at the very least it seemed they would pen all 3 scripts. Writing a treatment for the series and only being responsible for the first movie's screenplay is a lot less involvement than most would have predicted. Is this because Lucasfilm was worried about how they handled Game of Thrones once they ran out of source material from George R.R. Martin, or simply an issue of time and availability now that they have some serious obligation to Netflix? And what exactly is the pair's involvement in Rian Johnson's trilogy? I don't think they have any involvement in that at all. For Star Wars fans concerned about what the two will do with the franchise, the reason probably doesn't matter. So the interesting thing here is that, Steve, you probably know this because you worked in Hollywood as well. As a producer slash writer, at least from the TV world, you do these treatments for movies, and you can do like a treatment for each movie in this upcoming proposed trilogy that kind of gives a broad outline of what the movie is going to cover. It's like who the characters are, what the events are that happen, and so on and so forth. And then as a producer, once you've kind of gotten the story straight, you hire writers. And you bring on, like, let's say, like 3 writers, one for each movie in the trilogy. You give them your treatments, and you're like, okay, go off, write a script, communicate with each other as needed, and get us back something that we can then look over and get to the point where we feel it's ready to be taken into production. And so this is a very typical kind of TV writing, producing mentality, which is where Benioff and Weiss are kind of coming from. And even though technically Game of Thrones is TV, a lot of their productions were feature film scale. So like I feel like these guys are kind of bringing their kind of feature film, high quality television producing to Star Wars movies. And just because they're not going to be like sitting down and writing out the actual scripts for each Star Wars movie, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be heavily involved in the storytelling aspect of it. And my guess is that they're kind of coordinating with Rian Johnson on what they're planning, getting feedback from him, and also just to keep him updated on what they're doing, because his trilogy is going to come out long after theirs. So what I want to know from you guys is, do you think it's a good thing that they're not going to be actually sitting down and writing the actual scripts to these? Or do you think that this just kind of is the sign that they're pulling back from Star Wars? Steve, what do you think?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a good thing. I think when it comes down to the details, they they need to pull back even further than they did with Game of Thrones. That's the big issue. I think you have this series that they were fine up until George R.R. Martin signed off with Game of Thrones, and they need someone who can give them something solid in one solid piece that they can follow. Now, whether Rian Johnson's good to critique that, I have no idea. I mean, he's got a good enough education, I'll say that, but it's one of these things. It's a strange ground to tread on. I think Ryan is more interested in because they're doing something unique. They're trying to find out how to write a Star Wars series, and you look at it from that frame of reference. That's a daunting task because you have the expectation of four decades on top of you in this series. So I think if they got outside help, but they need people who are good. You guys brought up Kathleen Kennedy a little while ago and how she signed off on all these people. She did work with Lucas on one thing, but she forgot the big lessons that Lucas had. And Lucas's biggest issue, or the biggest problem he ran into, was, in my opinion, the loss of Gary Kurtz after Empire Strikes Back, because I felt like he started losing touch. He needs someone who can keep him in line. I think these guys need someone to keep him in line too. And I don't think, I think what has happened is that there's a bunch of yes men running around. It just feels like that because, I mean, you look at what Rian Johnson did to Last Jedi. It's like, who the hell signed off on that? I mean, really? I was shocked, and I don't know if I blame it, or maybe someone told Ryan, you got to put this in, put that in. It's a tenuous situation, and now it's like they're kind of stranded out in the middle of nowhere writing a series, kind of like, okay, what do we do with this? So I think bringing in people who are solid, who can understand the series, that's the main thing they can do, or understand the franchise. Because if they can do that, if they can have their own Tony Gilroy, like Gareth Edwards, that'd be great. I think, it's like, look, at the end of the day, I want a good freaking movie or a good TV series. So hopefully they will have someone who can jump in with them like that,
Benioff and Weiss are maniacs. Tom, do you think that this is a sign that they're kind of pulling away from their Disney deal?
Well, it's a sign that I could be right. And that's the other thing that kind of goes with, I'm starting to wonder that, you could be right, but you also got to think if they're going to put a trilogy after another trilogy, that's almost a decade and a half out. So I really don't see that being the case. I really do think they're one and the same. And I do think that it's just one of those things where they're, like I said before, they're like showrunners. They're meant to set this thing up and it's going to go. Now, if this is true, if they're pulling back and these kind of reports are coming out, if they're true, and the whole thing with Ryan going, oh, it's going to be so far off into the future, to me tells me more after Last Jedi dropped, his shit got pushed out. And if it is a separate thing for them, same thing as with them, they're either getting pushed out of it or whatever, because you even said themselves, they're kind of egomaniacs. All these guys kind of are to a point anyhow. And you can tell Johnson is just by the way he acts on Twitter. So, I really have a hard time seeing these even come to fruition at this point. If it does, it does only because they've sunk so much into it, maybe, because otherwise I really don't see Kathleen sticking around that much longer, because a lot of her people, because we'll bring Alan Horn into this. He's a very reactionary person. We've seen the way he reacted to the whole James Gunn situation. Now, no matter how you feel about it, obviously his call was the wrong call, or they wouldn't have brought James Gunn back. And we heard rumors that was his call. He made that call without even consulting Iger or Feige on the situation, and that pissed them off from what we heard. And that seems to probably be the case considering Gunn's back. So who's to say that after all this goes down that, if Rise of Skywalker underperforms and whatever The Mandalorian doesn't do what it's supposed to do on Disney Plus, they start talking about getting rid of her, or Alan Horn just automatically just gets rid of her. I don't know if he has that power, but again, we know her contract gets renewed every 2 years or whatever. But frankly, if the diminishing returns keep happening and these reports keep coming out, not just from, what you would consider rag sites, but places like Bloomberg, this franchise is not looking good. And they can try and say, oh, it's Star Wars fatigue all they want. Even Iger, I think, tried using that excuse. When Marvel shows that's not the case. It doesn't matter how much of something you have out there. As long as it's good, the people will consume it. And we just talked about at the beginning of the show, how many Marvel shows are we getting compared to Star Wars shows? Come on. And Star Wars is arguably just as, a vast universe, and even better yet, you can create just about anything you want in that universe because it's not tied down to things like Marvel is, to where, you have to worry about this, that, and the other. You can set your show 1,000 years in the past or 1,000 years in the future and create your own alien races and all kinds of stuff that wouldn't even affect the movies. And you could have some fun in that same universe without having to be like Luke Skywalker's long lost grandson. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it is interesting to note that, first of all, supposedly they weren't working on any of the Star Wars stuff while they were still in production on Game of Thrones. And then once Game of Thrones production was done, they were kind of, Benioff and Weiss were busy shopping around for an overall deal for kind of going forward. So I don't know how much work on Star Wars was done with that. But now that they've closed that deal with Netflix, the reason that it looks like that they're kind of stepping back from the writing and directing duties and just kind of taking the role more as producer going forward is that they have to start focusing on getting stuff off the ground for Netflix. And so it's just kind of like I think it's a workload thing that we're seeing them kind of step back from some of their responsibilities. And that brings us to the Hollywood Reporter article that the Nerdist article kind of referenced. And this is all about whether or not Netflix's overall deal with these guys was a good idea. So I'm just going to read through some of this real quick and get your thoughts on it. With a game-changing franchise behind them and another that might keep them busy for the next 6 years, Game of Thrones turned Star Wars maestros David Benioff and Dan Weiss have signed a 5-year, $250 million overall deal with Netflix that has been met with envy and a bit of head-scratching. And for those of you who don't know, an overall deal, basically, it's an exclusive deal of a right of first refusal, and you can't take that anywhere else after it's been refused or accepted. So basically, Netflix is getting exclusive rights to all of David Benioff and Dan Weiss's TV and movie ideas. If Netflix chooses not to do them, they're not allowed to go and shop them at other studios because the overall deal states that they have to remain exclusive to Netflix. And the $250 million is for making these movies and TV shows and stuff like that. The biggest TV overall deals have gone to prolific showrunners like Shonda Rhimes, Ryan Murphy, and Greg Berlanti, who juggle writing and overseeing other creators on multiple programs. Benioff and Weiss, both 48, have focused exclusively on one project and effectively made just 73 episodes of TV. They wouldn't even start on Star Wars for Disney until Thrones was finished. In contrast, the Netflix-based Rhimes, who has a deal for 4 years and 100 million plus, has 8 projects in the works. Halfway into her deal, Ryan Murphy, who has a 5-year, $300 million deal, said that he has 10 projects and 8 after moving to the streamer, and Berlanti has a TV record of 18 series on air for Warner Brothers. The only way to make a deal like this work is if you have multiple shows, one top exec tells Hollywood Reporter. The bet is that they'll do another Game of Thrones, and that's a big bet. So basically, Netflix's $250 deal with Benioff and Weiss is in the hopes that they're going to make another juggernaut like Game of Thrones to bring a lot of people into Netflix. Sources say the Thrones pair is writing a treatment for a Star Wars trilogy and is committed to pinning at least one of the films. The original deal was to write all 3. It's unclear if the duo, who have another feature for Fox Disney carved out, will do more than just write for Star Wars. Still, a person familiar with the Netflix deal says the streamer was briefed on their Star Wars schedule and isn't worried. It's not going to be 10 years until Netflix sees their first output, adding that Benioff and Weiss have a lot of ambition. And so a lot of the kind of rumor after this article came out was that Netflix was demanding that Benioff and Weiss work on their stuff, which is why they were stepping away from Star Wars. But they had to know going into the deal beforehand that Benioff and Weiss already had this commitment.
Yeah, they just said it in the thing. Yeah.
So the idea that Netflix would somehow interfere with their duties on Star Wars, I don't think it's a reasonable argument.
It could be that because of the Game of Thrones thing and everything going on, that it came down that they wanted just to try one out before they went farther, so they let them out of the 3-picture deal, and that allowed them to shop themselves around.
No, I don't think that has anything to do with it. I think basically they Benioff and Weiss want to get some stuff going at Netflix in addition to while they're working on the Star Wars stuff. So they kind of pulled back from writing and directing, but I think that their deal was mostly for producing. And because of their background in writing, they were going to write all these things, but instead they're just going to be doing the treatment. And then they'll be bringing on writers and directors just like they're going to be doing with their TV shows.
Kind of goes with what I was saying too, but yeah.
Yeah. So, Steve, what do you think of Netflix kind of going all in with Benioff and Weiss? Do you think it was a good move?
I'm really hesitant. I mean, it's, again, their last deal. I just don't want to see another series that gets hung out to dry like that. And Matt, you and I have had a history of TV shows we've watched that have ended up going off the rails last season. I mean, Game of Thrones was a good example. Then you have, Dexter did that, and then worst of all, Lost is. I know you're still sore about that one, but
I'm very salty about that.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I'm hesitant to have anybody working a show that I know they very well could just dump it or just leave it in the garbage, like a dead baby and run off. It's awful. I mean, it's a disservice to the fans. And then, they have, from what I can tell, they've been silent. If they had, they may have said something. I just haven't been listening. I just turned it off. So that's that,
They've been in hiding pretty much since the final season. Tom, do you think Netflix is wise to go in with Benioff and Weiss?
Well, I still question the whole thing with the deal because, like, depending on the source for that, if they had a 3-picture deal, they had to have been let out of that by Disney first to be able to do something like this, or you'd have a conflict that Disney could sue them over, couldn't they?
No, I don't think so, because basically Netflix signed the deal knowing that this deal was already in place. And the overall deal is for new projects, not projects that were...
Yeah, but then you said it was taken down to just one. That's the thing.
No, I didn't. Basically, I said that Benioff and Weiss might have chosen to scale back in terms of their commitment.
Okay, well, I'm assuming that it could go both ways, that they either made the choice or that Disney made the choice for them, then, is what I'm saying.
I doubt Disney made the choice because, like, their deal is still in place. Basically, I think that initially, before they got the Netflix deal, that they were like, okay, Game of Thrones is going to be over. We're going to have all this time. We can produce, write, and direct. And then once the Netflix deal went through, they're like, well, we're going to have to be splitting our time between these projects. So we're not going to invest in directing and writing as much, but we're still going to be producing it. And I believe that the Disney deal was for producing the new trilogy as opposed to writing and directing.
Right.
But I think that was kind of implied that, like,
I don't remember how it was worded in the article there. That's what I was referring to. But I guess overall, they're just trying to be JJs and these other guys where they try to get 100 things under their wings, so they have 100 things going on. That part don't surprise me one bit. I mean, get while the getting's good. I mean, if they made this deal before the final episodes aired, then they did a great job on their part, because if it would have been after, then it probably wouldn't have been such a sweet deal, I don't think. And Netflix, on the other hand, as we brought up earlier, they're scared right now of Disney and AT&T and the incoming streaming wars that are actually already kind of begun. So,
well, they were shopping this deal around after the final season of Thrones premiered, and I think that a lot of the criticism pointed their way might have affected that. But a lot of people are saying, like, oh, because HBO didn't, or Warner Brothers didn't pick up their deal because they were the hit makers for Game of Thrones for HBO, then that means that people lost faith in them. But I think Warner Brothers, they were more concerned about getting J.J. Abrams, and they gave him like a $500 million overall deal, and so, like, they couldn't afford to meet Benioff and Weiss's price, and that left them free to kind of go to Netflix. And Netflix is gearing up. They need a lot of content to compete with Disney and Warner's going forward, so they want people who could come in and produce a lot of stuff fairly quickly. And I think they looked at Benioff and Weiss like, if these guys could get us another Game of Thrones, then it'll be worth the investment. Like Steve said, these guys are not known of being good writers of their own volition.
Right.
So I'm wondering, how good of a deal this is for Netflix.
Probably not very good, because that's the thing. I mean, let's just bring it all full circle here. as you just said, you know, basically, unless they have something to go on, they suck. And even when they do have kind of something to go on, they still suck because they fucked up Dexter. And that's the thing that I've never really been a fan of the show. I never really got a chance to watch it or anything. It's not why I'm not a fan or anything. But I just never seen it. But from what I've heard from fans is that they screwed it all up, and this did the same thing with Game of Thrones, even though they had free reign to do whatever they wanted. And even though that's pretty much what they did, even though they had an outline, I guess, from what's his face to kind of go on. But regardless, this is one of those situations. I think I just kind of said they got all the getting was good, and it was all about. I'm sure they high-fived each other after this deal, not so much of the deal itself, but because they knew they pulled one over on Netflix, probably. I guess, for a better way of putting it, I guess. I don't know how else to put it, but I don't know if Steven has anything different to say about it.
Well, not, you know, to add to it, I think the main issue you've got to take a look at is what do they have in their pocket? Because I know, you know, forgive me if I'm wrong, weren't they the ones that kind of got booted off this Lord of the Rings deal?
Yeah, they didn't get booted, but they got over.
No, they were never really. They were in talks with Amazon for their overall deal, and a lot of people speculated that if Amazon picked them up, then they'd be involved with their Lord of the Rings show. But they were never actually involved with the Lord of the Rings.
Okay, because see that right there. I mean, you know, that right there is putting them on a solid ground, even though they're going to have this show created, and I don't know what direction. I suppose I've heard it wasn't going to be the Lord of the Rings itself, the books. Maybe the Silmarillion. I have no idea.
It's based on the Second Age, so like they're pulling like stuff from the Silmarillion and creating something completely original that is not in any of the books, that hasn't been seen before.
Yeah, that's scary. With those guys, that's scary.
Yeah, but it's not them. It's someone different.
But yeah, that's the whole thing. What I'm saying is, you know, Benioff and Weiss, that is kind of a scary prospect. So if they bring something that, you know, if they can do what they replicate what they did with Game of Thrones, and that bring in a really solid established property, there may be hope. As long as it's like someone's just got to rein them in a bit. Game of Thrones, I mean, you know, having Martin, you know, work with them, that was really easy. You having the writer of the story, incredible books, along with the fact that he's a TV writer, that really helped them a lot. I think if they have something like that, they may do okay. But if they do not, watch out. I don't think there's going to be anything good coming out of them.
Yeah, I do think that their trilogy is going to be separate from Rian Johnson's trilogy. We're going to see Rian Johnson's trilogy after their trilogy is complete. They're going to be more producing duties on the Star Wars movies as opposed to writing and directing, even though they'll probably have a hand in the writing end of things. And we're going to be seeing at least 2 or 3 things coming down the pipeline in Netflix from them fairly soon, would be my guess. Hey, thanks for checking out this video. I hope you got a lot out of it. And remember, if you want to support the channel, please check us out on the socials. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Matthew Kadish. You can also find our discussion group over on Facebook at eggfbgroup.com. That's eggfbgroup.com. Takes you right to our Facebook discussion group. And if you'd like to help support the channel, check out my books over on Amazon.com. You can find them by going to kadishbooks.com. That's Kadish books.com. And as always, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you're notified every time we upload a new video for more movie, TV, and entertainment news and analysis. This is Matthew Kadish. I'll catch you guys later.